So if you have a printer like myself or know someone who has one, you might be aware that there's a lot of leftover materials. This applies to both FDM and resin. I've been left with a lot of failed prints and supports, and I've kept a lot of them instead of throwing them away. I've been left with a lot of interesting textures, which would look great as a terrain piece. At the time of recording this video, a competition had come up. It basically involved creating a terrain or diorama piece, predominantly out of supports and failed prints, which was great motivation for me to create something out of all of these pieces. So of course I went with something post-apocalyptic looking. I used some reference photos from Fallout and from Necromunda, District 9, Waterworld, all the great post-apocalyptic and thrown together kind of cityscapes and dystopian futures. I threw some pieces together with a hot glue gun just so they would stick, and I think it looks pretty great at this stage. I also used some straws to give it a little bit more support so it wouldn't fall apart. There are some great textures going on here which I really like, and I'm glad I've kept these pieces. I also used some leftover debris to create some wires. So yeah, I did skip ahead a little bit more here. So I've used some other materials as well, but I made sure I kept it quite minimalistic and made everything myself or from recycled other pieces. This was definitely inspired by like Blade Runner and Star Wars and those kind of little marketplaces you see in like dystopian and science fiction movies and games. The fish is from a sushi packet. I've kept a few of these. I have like a tin in the drawer where I just keep loads of different pieces that I find. I made some little bowls and pieces of food out of clay, and the like noodly type things are made out of leftover materials from the printer. For the fishing line, I just used some hot glue. It was a bit of a pain to do. The upper part, I decided to create a sort of generator or electricity source. I used a probiotic bottle to create the shape, and then I just went to town and just started gluing pieces to it to make it look more metallic and more like a sort of a generator type of thing. So at this stage I'm quite happy with the structure and the shape of it. I've primed it all in black spray paints, waited for it to dry, and now I'm just dry brushing some white over the top. Dry brushing is a great way to bring out some of the details and create some natural light and shadows. This next stage I'm adding some textured mud. I've made this myself using all-purpose filler with some sand and some paint added with a little bit of water. So it creates this paste and I just add it. Now I am starting to add some colours, just adding some basic silver metallics, so some darker silvers and some lighter silvers just to create some differences. I'm going to add some more variation of colours here. I really like using colour, so I've decided to add some brass. I've also glued on some barrels. There were some misprinted ones, so I decided to use them. At this point, I've started to add some more grime and some interesting colours like you would see in a rusty metal building. I've decided to use oils because they have really nice intensity, so I've just got some cheap oils and I'm using some low odour spirits. You can use white spirits if you want to, but I prefer this stuff because it's not as harsh and as chemically smelling, but I still wear gloves anyway because oils can get a little bit messy and I don't really like how the chemicals feel on my skin. You leave these a little bit thicker if you want to create some nice textures, or thin them out to create some like grease and verdigris. Just adding a really nice turquoise colour now for some extra verdigris. I really like this paint. I've showed it before on my video where I talk about weathering techniques. So here I just wanted to update you on what I've done. So I've started to paint more of the pieces. I've painted that as a sort of computer screen. I've painted these wires in a really nice copper colour. I'm really glad that I kept the wispy parts on. I used this copper from Darkstar. It's a fantastic colour, it's very intense. I haven't completely covered the base in grout because I had the idea to use some water texture. This is from Vallejo and I've never worked with this before. I usually use epoxy resin, which is great as well, but can get very messy and it's not really great for the environment. So I've mixed up some of the Vallejo water texture with some paints and we're going to put down our first layer. The first layer is going to be like this dark murky green colour, and then we're going to build up layers gradually from there, adding some different colours for variation. I missed out a few steps here, but just to kind of recap what I've done, I've added some more paint to these parts, these bowls. I've decided to go with some like intense colours to make them look a little bit more like comic booky. I made the little pieces look more like sushi. And of course with the water effect, as I mentioned before, I built up some gradual layers and made it look like it's more irradiated and murky and disgusting. I've also added some reeds as well, just to give it a bit more character. These were just from a model railway set which I had. I want to make the barrels a key feature as well, so I used this really intense green paint which I have, which is really cheap, just this glowing green acrylic paint, and then I mixed that in with some of the water effect and then put it all around just in bits and pieces so we could still see some of the darker colours underneath, and then I put some mid-tone kind of greens as well just to create some variation in light and dark. Now I'm just adding some sepia dip all around. So I'm going to add it to the metallic leaking parts and to the mud as well, just to give it some more depth. Next I'm going to build up some more textures using some pigments. Again, you can watch my weathering tutorial for more tips and hints. I'm just adding some hairspray so it doesn't fall off. Now I'm creating even more texture using some rusty orange colours, make it look like a fresher coat of rust. I wasn't super happy with the mud colour, it blended too much in with the rust, so I decided to make it more of a dry, kind of grey, earthy colour. That grate I used created some lovely textures, so I decided to dry brush some paint over the top. And here I'm just putting some paint over the top of the scales to bring out some of the details on that sushi fish. Just to add some more detail, I'm going to be adding some propaganda and advertisement type posters, so some Fallout ones, some from the 40k universe. I just found these online from a Google search and resized them. I printed them out and then I cut them onto some thin cardboard. So I've cut some of them out, and as you can see, it's created some nice character to them. I've added some electricity and warning signs to the generator, so you have a better idea of what it is. And now I'm just adding some sepia tone to make them look a bit more washed and worn out, and more in character with the whole piece. And here I'm just adding some final layers of the water effect. I highly recommend this stuff. And that's the piece finally done. Here are just some close-up shots of it. I definitely want to create more modular terrain pieces out of scrap 3D printed parts. I hope this has also given you some inspiration and showed you what you can do with recycled materials. As I mentioned before, I entered this piece into a competition and I actually won first prize. I won a Hallett 1 resin printer, which is really cool. I haven't printed with resin before, but I'm very excited. So I've got all the materials and safety equipment and I'm ready to go. Thank you for watching this video, and like I said, I hope it gives you some inspiration.